Rebecca, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Joe. I am super excited to be here.
Great to have you with us. So, what do you wish more people knew?
The one thing I wish people knew about making a great first impression or introducing themselves is that it is about getting the other person to say, tell me more.
The truth is, we never get a second chance to make a first impression. And for a lot of folks, our first impression really fails to impress. Why do you think that is?
I think it's because what we try to do is impress people. So we end up rattling off our experiences and our qualifications, and we talk about ourselves and end up breathlessly reciting our resume, which is what I used to do. And so you end up sending an impression, but it's typically wordy, granular, and in the weeds. So I think that's what happens. And then, especially because we're nervous, we just spit it out so fast, we end up overwhelming the listener.
So, we end up talking a lot about ourselves instead of talking about what we could do for the other person.
Right. So if you want to get someone to say, tell me more, you actually only need one sentence that gets the other person to instantly visualize how their life would be different and better with you in it.
Mm.
So I call that the difference between an about me introduction and an about you introduction. So about me is I'm a certified LinkedIn ninja, and I talk about my qualifications and I give myself a cute title, ninja. About you would be I help worry job hunters introduce, market, and promote themselves in 20 words or less.
And people are naturally more interested to speak out and speak up if it involves themselves and their own self-interest. So make it about me. And I might ask you, hey, tell me more. Make it about you. I'll be like, oh, that's nice. That's great.
Exactly. Or, yeah, whatever. Exactly. And I mean, that's what actually science shows, which is especially in these environments where everyone's multitasking and attention deficit or time pressed. If you can't tell them what it does for them, your introduction should answer the question, what do you do and how does it help me? Then they're definitely more interested in learning and saying, tell me more.
So boiling that message down to 20 words or less, as you help people do, is a challenge. And it has to be a tight message. So take us through that process of how to make those words count.
So I typically give people frameworks where I tell them the easiest one that I do is I help my target audience with something that they want, something that they desire. So what's like what they want to be changed. And so I help worry job hunters, and I try to be a little bit descriptive. So someone's like, oh my gosh, that's me. Or I know someone who's a worry job hunter. And then what is it they would love different? Introduce, market, and promote themselves in 20 words or less, or confidently explain why they're the ideal candidate to hire.
So it's this visualization of here's what I do for you, which brings this result.
And you just need one where they're just like, oh, because then you want that in the interaction where someone's like, they can visualize it and they see, oh my gosh, how did you know? Or you're reading my mind, or I know someone, my sister, my spouse, they're having that very same problem.
What do you think are some of the ways that we get in our own way when it comes to helping others visualize what we can do for them? I mean, how are we tripping ourselves up here?
I think the first thing is we think we have to impress people with our qualifications. So we say things like, well, I'm a 30-year supply chain professional and I worked for Procter and Gamble and I lived in all these different countries, and we go on and on and on because our objective is to impress. And which happens is we leave the introduction open for someone's interpretation. Like, do they even know what Procter and Gamble is? Do they know what a supply chain is? But if you talk about what's important to them, they're like, that's interesting. And then you can say, well, the reason why is I spent 20 years working for a large consumer products company. And then they ask you. So we trip ourselves up by trying to impress, thinking that the other person understands what we're talking about.
So in order to get that kind of clarity, we probably have to do a bit of research on our side before we enter into these conversations, right?
Well, a really easy way to do that is you can ask people, you can interview people. I interviewed a lot of job hunters when I started my company, and they always said worried, struggle, confidence. And I'm like, oh, if I say I help worry job hunters, they'll like identify with the adjective. That's one way of doing it.
Right. So the work for that really starts even before you're in that conversation. You have to begin earlier to shape that message.
Correct. So, and I think the people who do the best with this type of process is they're very empathetic. So it's not about being clever and I want to wow you with my, turn of a phrase. It's really about thinking, wow, here's an entrepreneur and I help first time entrepreneurs. And then what is it they want? Find their first client fast.
Hmm. Yeah. Try not to be clever, right? Just be
Correct.
clear. Yeah. Right. I remember doing that very early on when I was shortlisted for a speaking engagement and I tried in the pre-event call to dazzle them with lots of turns of phrases and I think it confused them and I didn't get that gig. So I learned the hard way.
I learned by when I started my business, I had told someone I want to work with them on personal branding. And so they said, come to my living room and I'll get 6 people. So then I was telling my nephew, I had this workshop on personal branding. It went really well. I told another person, she said, come to my house and I'll get 12 people. And I'm like, and I doubled my business. So my nephew said, well, what did you do? And I said, well, I help you create a personal brand that ignites you and excites others. So then we get in this gigantic argument. He's 20. So he says, I don't know what a personal brand is, which I actually didn't have a definition either. So we start to argue about it. And finally, I was so irritated. I'm like, Jacob, Auntie Becky tells people to say who they are and what they do in 20 words or less. And he's like, why don't you just say that?
That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that the idea of being empathetic and also being humble enough to realize that your introduction, the way you think you're introducing yourself to others and the way they are perceiving you might not really be the way they're actually receiving that message.
Yeah, I would definitely say you want to test it out on people. And then the moment someone says, I don't get it, instead of getting defensive, it's a signal saying it's not clear because it only matters if it's clear to the other person. It doesn't matter if it's clear to you if they don't get it.
Yeah. It's not what we say, it's what others hear.
Correct. Yeah. Great way of saying it.
So scripting that perfect intro, that's really effective. I'm wondering what happens though after the intro. So you're on point, you make it about them, you talk about what you can do for them, and you've boiled it down to 20 words or less, or something close to that. And then they throw you a curveball question, and that you haven't prepared for, or at least not as well as you have for this opener. So what do you do next?
Well, I will tell you, it kind of depends on your situation. So if you're going around the room and there's 20 of you, meeting your new president of your business for the first time, and they say, you get 10 seconds, take 10 seconds, stand out. Because everyone else will be talking about where they worked and how many years, and you will make a difference. But if you're like doing a job interview, what I tell people, so if you have a little bit, 30 seconds, 60 seconds, is keep going down the path of what's important to the other person. And you want to say things like, well, as you know, it's so hard in this day and age to stand out from the crowd and people don't have big attention spans. And you want the other person to go like, yeah, that's exactly what's going on. And you want to, again, create a mental picture that they can understand. So then what happens is they're like, oh, yeah, that's so interesting. Tell me again what you do. And then you can be more specific. So
Mm,
keep drawing the person in for the first, call it 15, 30 seconds. Make the conversation about the other person. And you want to hear them say, "Oh, yeah, or I was just talking about that with someone else, or you must be reading my mind." That tells you
yeah.
you're on the same wavelength.
Yeah. And you can drop in all the other information after you've already got their attention and they're interested.
Well, what happens is they'll ask you, well, how did you do that? Like, oh, well, I spent 30 years doing ABC. You did. And so then the next trick is to make sure you pause. So it's not about you breathlessly trying to dominate the air. It's about having a conversation. And the beauty of it is you get to say everything you want to say, but it comes out like you're asking me questions and we're going back and forth.
Right. Now they've asked for that information. And so you sharing it comes across as actually valuable and not you just trying to force things down their alley.
Right. And then they know to expect it or they're listening for it. And it comes in context,
Hmm.
meaning they want to know, well, how is it that you learned how to do that? Or what did you learn about? They'll ask you the questions that you want to answer, but now they're interested.
So you talked about this a moment ago about sort of tuning for the right conversation? Because not all conversations are created equal. If I'm trying to pitch myself for a job, that's one conversation, that's kind of introduction. If I'm trying to get an opportunity within my company, that's a different conversation, that's a different introduction. If I'm just
Right.
meeting someone for the first time, that's a different conversation. So, how do we go about keeping sort of the core clarity and the core brevity of that intro, but also tune appropriately for these different conversations?
Think about, can you explain what you do to a 10-year-old? Can you make it very simple so that it's just generic so that someone can just at least picture what you do? Maybe they don't need it, but they can understand it. So the way you do it is you say, for instance, if I don't know you were sitting on a plane, well, I work in the supply chain, and gives a little bit of context, and then your little personal brand statement. And then you try to explain it simply as if you were talking to, like I said, a 10-year-old. So it's very simple language. That's how I would do it in general. And I would try to keep that core. The other way to think about it is my value, what I believe in, or what I center myself on, is being in communications and clarity. So then I think about the other audiences, and I personally have like 5 or 6 introductions, whether it's an entrepreneur setting, whether it's a personal branding session, or if it's something that I'm doing where I'm giving a workshop on clarity on something else. And how do I introduce myself to a corporate crowd?
So, when it comes to these conversations, so often it's not just what we say, it's also what we show. And I'm wondering if there are any tips you have for sort of those nonverbal signals that we inevitably transmit in the course of conversation that sometimes may run counter to the words that we're actually using.
Yeah, I will say the first thing is you have to practice, because it sounds weird to you or you're not used to saying it. And you want to be in a position where if someone just puts a microphone under your mouth and says, introduce yourself, you can introduce yourself. And that takes a lot of practice. I practice into my phone. I practice using like Zoom or into my, FaceTime or something. And when the light comes on, and I just practice saying it, so I'm always ready. So number one is practice. Number two is intonation. If you sound so hesitant, who's going to believe you? So you want to practice, and you want to listen to your intonation so that your intonation goes down,
Yeah.
and you want to sound confident. And the
Yeah.
third
Not a
thing is
question.
correct.
Do you know what you do? Is that why you're leaving it dangling with a question mark at the end?
Yeah. And if you listen to people, they'll say, like, hey, my name is Rebecca and I'm in the supply chain and I help people with their forecasts. And you're just like, wow, do I really want to hire that person? And I say the last thing is practice to watch your pace, because you want the other person to hear you. And sometimes when you talk really fast, it conveys nerves and the other person doesn't really understand what you said. Sort of ruins the moment.
Rebecca Okamoto, I really enjoyed this conversation and learned a lot from it. 11 words.
Very nice. Thank you.